Okay, welcome to this open meeting of the Board of Trustees of the Palo Alto Unified School District. The board met in closed session immediately preceding this meeting and took one reportable action. In closed session, the board unanimously approved the special education agreement PAUSD SE 21-22.06 in the sum of $140,000 in relation to an anticipated claim on behalf of a special education student. Let us move to the approval of the agenda order. Is there a motion?
We approve the agenda as presented.
I think there's an amendment.
Let's do a second and then.
Yeah.
Did you second?
No, I actually want to recommend that we move.
Okay, so I second and now we can discuss.
Go ahead.
Naomi.
Yeah.
I want to recommend that we move 8B Bond Citizens Oversight Committee Annual Report on the strong school bonds for 2020-21 from the information items to staff reports as new item 7C.
Okay, is there a second to that? We'll take that as an amendment. Is there a second to that?
Second. Beat
Okay, so let's vote on the amendment then, which is to move the Board Oversight Committee to from information to staff reports to be 7C. Student preferential vote.
Aye.
Board members, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passed unanimously. So then we'll move on to the main motion, which is the approval of the agenda order as amended. Student board members, preferential vote.
Aye.
Board members, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. The agenda order is approved. Let's move on then to reports, beginning with student board member reports. Ms. Bahraini, would you like to start?
I would, thank you. I want to start by saying we're having a really good beginning of the semester. It's looking like it's shaping up to be a great one, and I'm very excited about it. So first of all, we are having a racial equity training, the first of 2 dates, which is going to be on February 22nd. And also the new staff student consent education committee met this morning and will continue to meet on Tuesday mornings. Last week, we celebrated Lunar New Year, as well as had the Spring Club Fair. We're preparing for Love Week next week, which is our slate of Valentine's Day events. And we are also preparing for our Spring Spirit Week. Throughout the month, the Student Executive Council will be celebrating Black History Month with information about notable figures. Gun Hacks was held over the weekend, which is a computer science coding kind of tournament competition for our students. The Esports Club has a retro game tournament starting next week. Film Club is holding a passion project contest, which is also starting in the next week or two. The Percussion Ensemble has a concert this Friday at 7:30, and our school newspaper, The Oracle, came out with a new issue last Friday. Senior nights for our winter sports are going to be in the next couple of weeks as we transition into spring sports. I think I heard that around 500 students are participating this year, so I'm excited to see the wins that our teams can rack up. And speaking of wins, I have one big one to report that I'm very happy about. I take great pleasure in announcing that on Saturday, to the roars of, I'd say, a couple of hundred students who came out to support Gun, and after trailing for the entire game, our boys varsity basketball team beat Pally in the rivalry game. Thanks to a buzzer beater by senior Rogan Gibbons, some free throws from senior Sam Mulkey, 3-pointers by sophomore Ethan Kitch, and just great plays all around by our boys team. Thank you.
Ms. Acosta, can you top that?
I'll try. So hi everyone. Since our last meeting, Pally has also kicked off the semester with fun events and celebrations. This week, ASB is hosting Love Week to celebrate Valentine's Day with activities on the quad and selling valgrams for people to buy for others at the school. ASB also hosted their second club day where clubs that were chartered for the second semester were showcased and students were able to sign up for those clubs. The prom location was revealed, which will be at the SF Exploratorium on May 14th, which is really, really exciting. And ASB is recognizing Black History Month with weekly posts on @PallyASB on Instagram about Black history and notable figures. Pali AASU celebrated Lunar New Year with the school by handing out goodies and treats on the quad. And Pali Choir Pops is taking place on tomorrow, the 9th, and on Thursday, the 10th. Campanile released a new issue this week, which will be followed by Verde, CMAG, and Viking. As for sports, although Annika said Gun beat Pali in the varsity boys basketball game, Pali did beat Gun in the other 4 basketball games.
It was about even.
Yeah. The juniors hosted a spike ball tournament last week on the 1st, the 2nd, and the 4th. Pali Cheers having open practice this week, and tryouts will happen next week. And finally, students are making their course selections for the next school year, and Pali Rise has teamed up with One Love to execute consent education workshops for students in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item on our agenda is the superintendent report, Dr. Austin.
Those are tough to beat. We don't have anything called Love Week here, so I'm already disadvantaged. Which I think it was Ms. Perini. Did you talk about the EA Sports? Yeah, I'd like to know more about that later. Just something I'm starting to get some interest in around that whole world and how our students might interact there. And a couple of our board members and I are doing the virtual boxing. Gives me an opportunity to act out one of my favorite movies, Cinderella Man. So that's always a winner. We're going to jump in here, though. Again, a thank you to our community members for their volunteerism around our 1PA effort. And what's nice now is you helped get us through that really critical period of time where we weren't sure if we were going to be able to stay open. We're past that part right now, which is great. But a lot of our parents are continuing to show up and help and interact and do those things that really is all about schools and communities partnering, and that part is fantastic. I'm going to share just a little revision to our volunteer policy, which I think is a good thing. But we were promised with great certainty that Santa Clara County Public Health would not deviate from the California Department of Public Health, and I just found out minutes ago that is apparently not the stance now, and that they have made some decisions to deviate, including indoor masking rules. Now, that is not a school issue, but that is a community issue, and they've made some changes that deviate as it relates to jail workers and healthcare professionals. So I need to do some follow-up to see if it is still going to be the official stance that they will stick with CDPH. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because many parents have written to me about things that they'd like to see in legislation and rules, and I've directed them to CDPH because our information was that there's no reason to go to your local county if the CDPH is going to be the authority and the county is going to be in line with them. So that is a change that was unexpected. We'll see where that goes. But for us, and I will be sending this out tomorrow, I just have some cleanup work to do on it. For volunteers, we are going to say that volunteers need to be masked indoors and outdoors on campus. Okay, so it could be a different rule, meaning a student could be outside without a mask. Okay, but we're going to ask volunteers that they remain masked. And the trade-off for that is that we are not going to require proof of vaccination or a negative test. So we'll be more in alignment with the rest of the order. There is no order for those two things. And in fact, we have been allowing our parents, family members to attend athletic events for several weeks now under these same guidelines, remaining masked, but nothing above and beyond that. So we'll announce that tomorrow. I have run it by all of our principals and some people I trust for good feedback. And I think we're going to have a good result there. But I think the idea is, I was going to say this verbally once, and I'll try to do it probably a little cleaner in writing, that in the beginning, there was a real thought that a vaccination meant that you had a much lower chance of getting COVID in any form. Well, Omicron has changed that equation a little bit, and it is less of a guarantee that a vaccination gives you that level of protection, and a person who is vaccinated can still have and transmit COVID, as we've seen in our numbers. If a mask is something that our healthcare professionals tell us still is a beneficial mitigating factor, then let's go with the mask. And that's our thought, and the parents I spoke to felt pretty strongly on that as well. So we will get that out. It'll be very clean when it goes out tomorrow, along with the links to the California Department of Public Health guidelines, and should help us with some of our outdoor events, especially where parents want to volunteer. We think we can do it safely now and in a better way. So that is it for my comments tonight.
Thank you. Next item on our agenda is open forum. Open forum is an opportunity to speak to the board on non-agendized items. And both for this item and for other items, you can sign up to speak either virtually if you're not here, or in person. For open forum, we have 14 speakers, and so we will allocate 2 minutes each, unless we get another couple of speakers during our first speaker, in which case we'll reduce the time to 1.5 minutes per our board policies. But at this point, each speaker should be receiving 2 minutes. We have several students who signed up to speak, and one of our practices is that we move students to speak first when they sign up. So we will start with Betsabe Acosta in person.
Good evening. I'm Betsabe Acosta. I'm part of the YCS Learn Commission, which stands for Leading Engagement for Anti-Racism. And today our committee will be presenting on integrating microaggression training within the Palo Alto School District. Our goal is to really make our community safer for BIPOC students, considering that the Palo Alto District is a predominantly white community. So today I'll be giving an overview on microaggressions, and what microaggressions are: indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group. They more often than not happen to a daily basis, and they may go really unnoticed by a lot of people. So there are 3 main types of racial microaggressions. There are microassaults, which are explicit racial attacks that can be verbal or nonverbal. It can be things like using racial slurs, offensive signs, or behavioral discrimination. In November at Gunn High School, 6 students were being bullied and harassed. One of the students, a black student, was called the N-word, and this is an example of these microassaults. There are also micro insults, which are racial comments that belittle and subtly insult a person. There are micro invalidations, which are comments that invalidate people's feelings, their thoughts, or their personal experiences. As a Latina student here in the Palo Alto District, I can say that I've received plenty of microaggressions that I hadn't noticed before when I was younger. Whether it was being told that my English was articulate, or that I was well-spoken, or if I was in the correct class, being asked if I was, if I needed to be redirected. These microaggressions have always been around me, and I just hadn't sat down and thought about how harmful these actions could be towards people like me. These microaggressions have a huge impact on a lot of individuals. They increase rates of depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, prolonged stress and trauma, and these high amounts of stress can lead to headaches, high blood pressure, sleeping difficulties, and have actually been linked to heart disease in African Americans. In the classroom, it disrupts the student's learning engagement, and it creates a harmful and unsafe environment that a student may not be comfortable being in and may not be comfortable coming back to. I'd really like to see people who care about the BIPOC community step up and help this microaggression training be pushed forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jessica Zhang. I'm sorry, Makalia Miller, and then Jessica Zhang.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michaela Miller. I am a PAUSD alum. I graduated from Pali in 2020. I'm also part of Learn Commission. Today, I will be presenting our findings from a microaggression survey we sent out to both Pali Gun students and alum. From the survey, we gathered a total of 95 responses, which could have been larger, but I think that the data we found still speaks volumes. The goal was to hear personal experiences and get the minority voice. Of the responses we got, a total of 95% accounts for the BIPOC population. Both students and staff alike have made inappropriate comments on a student's skin color, racial background, and just straight up stereotypes from what we have found. Students are feeling unheard. One of the students said, quote, "I felt called out and embarrassed by my teacher, and they just shrugged at me when I told them how I felt." I think this is unacceptable and we should do something about that. They are often made to feel like it's not a big deal, but as Betsabe mentioned earlier, it definitely is and has a big impact. When we asked, do you know what a microaggression is, 63% said a firm yes. 43.2% was a tie for students have learning about microaggressions in school and on social media. A loved one or the person that responded to the survey saying they had experienced microaggression was a 57.9%. Out of 51 responses, 30% were negative, 41% were indifferent, 14%, less than 14% talked to a friend, and about 15% talked to a trusted adult or admin person. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Jessica Zhang. I see Ms. Zhang twice on here, actually, once for in-person and once on Zoom, so I'm not sure.
She actually was not able to make it in person, so if it's okay for her to present.
No, it's perfectly fine. Ms. Zhang,
Hello.
then on Zoom.
Hi. I am Jessica Zhang. I am a student at Gunn High School, and today I'm here to advocate for staff trainings and in a follow-up to Ms. Michaela's presentation. So according to student stories, when students approach staff or admin with stories of microaggressions or ways that other students made them feel uncomfortable.
Ms. Zhang, sorry, we didn't hear you until just a moment ago. Could you start over and then we'll start timing you from there?
Okay, no problem. I'm Jessica Zhang. I am a senior at Gunn High School, and I'm here to advocate for staff microaggression trainings or diversity trainings. In the survey that Michaela was mentioning, I read a lot of student stories that had experiences that students had when they brought up a microaggression experience they had to a staff member or admin, and much of the response was dismissive or just they felt like they couldn't approach staff, and the response they got was perhaps insensitive. And that kind of points to a bigger problem in that staff might not understand how microaggression manifests in a classroom, and just if they don't have experience with that, they might not know how to properly respond. And that's not necessarily their fault, but it is something that we can improve on. And so what I'm here to do is to advocate for staff trainings. In our program, we have a few things we would like to see in these staff trainings. One of them would be examples of how microaggressions might manifest in the classroom. Secondly, we want to see empathy and trainings relating to having teachers imagine themselves in the places of students who might experience these microaggressions. And thirdly, we want to practice approachability so that teachers can present themselves as people that students want to talk to regarding microaggressions and different ways that they might feel uncomfortable on campus. In that way, we can like promote staff and students, like a better relationship between staff and students, and just a more racially aware like culture on campus. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Miriam Tayebi in person. And then after Ms. Tayebi will be Inez Garcia, also in person.
Good evening. I'm Miriam Tayebi, and I'm a Pali sophomore and part of the YCS Learn Commission. Along with a staff microaggression training, we're also proposing a student microaggression training. Microaggressions are a recurring problem among students, leaving students feeling unsafe in their environment. A microaggression training shouldn't only be taught to students once in their high school careers. There needs to be constant reminders on this issue to ensure real change. The more students are taught about microaggressions, the more likely they'll notice it in their day-to-day lives. So where can this be implemented into the high school curriculum? I went to Gun freshman year and now attend Pali, and I also did living skills last semester. And I think that in these classes, a microaggression training can easily fit into them. In living skills, every student is required to take it before graduating. And in this class, there's already units like social identity that teach students about race and gender-related issues. In this unit, there should be required assignments, guest speakers, and slideshows that train students in depth about the complexities of microaggressions. Required assignments can also ensure that students will contribute their full attention since it will be graded. At both Gun and Pali, in self and advisory, there can be a basic yearly training to during self and advisory, there can be a basic yearly training where it can just consist of a simple slideshow that covers how microaggressions, what microaggressions are and how it affects others, to constantly remind the students about how it affects the school. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Veronica Oropeza on Zoom. I mean, sorry, our next speaker is Veronica Oropeza on Zoom. Am I? Oh, sorry. I think I apologize. Inez Garcia, I apologize. Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Inez Garcia. I'm a senior at Gun High School, and I'm a part of the YCS Learn Commission. I also happen to be one of SEC's 2 diversity commissioners. So following what my peers have just said, we really do hope to implement this program. So I'll be discussing logistics. We hope to send a survey to Gun and Pali staff discussing their experience with microaggressions and what they've noticed. We did mention that staff are often the perpetrators of these microaggressions, but in order to work with them, we need their perspective. After receiving this survey, we'd hope to present at a staff meeting and gain input from both the Gun and Pali principals. In order to implement this program, which we would hope to be occurring in both schools, we'd want the input of everyone. After this, we'd hope to work with Gun and Pali teachers to create a SELF program, reaching students throughout all 4 years of high school. We'd also hope to send out an additional survey to students, gaining their knowledge on microaggressions all 4 years. In order to understand the effectiveness of this program, we'd have to gauge their understanding throughout their entire high school career. As Latina, I unfortunately have seen microaggressions firsthand. From being asked, as Betsabeth said, if I was in the right classroom, to teachers continually telling me perhaps this wasn't the right class for me, to even feeling out of place at my very own school. Over time, I've grown to love PAUSD, and I'm excited to leave this year, and I'm excited for my sister who has just begun her journey at Gun. And as someone who loves the district, I know there's so much potential to create a safer space for BIPOC students. As Diversity Commissioner, I've worked with my peer, Annika Saraf, to create that space through events like Lunar New Year, Black History Month, and Dia de los Muertos. But I do believe there is more we can do, like this program. So I'd like to thank you for your time tonight, and I do hope we can work together to implement this. Thank you.
Mr. Dover, can I just say, I am guessing that these students are already in talks with some of our staff, but I want to make sure that either our staff reaches out to them or they reach out to our staff. Yes? Good. Great. Wonderful. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you for all of those comments. Next then is Veronica Oropeza on Zoom. No? Oh, at the first, oh, you don't see her on Zoom. I get it. Next, we can try again if she joins. Next is Hillary on Zoom. No, I'm sorry, in person.
I'm actually in person.
There you are.
I exist.
Great.
So my name is Hillary Mark, and I'm a very proud teacher at Briones Elementary. And I would like to hear the board respond to the December 13th letter from PAEA. Thank you.
Next is Jen Kepnick, also in person.
Hi, my name is Jen Kepnick, and I'm a teacher at Nixon Elementary School. And I would also like to hear the board respond to the PAEA letter from December 13th. And I also want to thank all of these students for speaking. I completely and wholeheartedly support more trainings on microaggressions to help both students and staff. Thank you.
Next is Umberto Bracco on Zoom. Okay, then we will move to Sarahi Salamanca.
Good evening. My name is Sarai Espinosa Salamanca. I am the Learn Commission Manager for Youth Community Service. Thank you for making the time to listen to our students this evening. We actually have been working on Learn Commission for about a year. The research mainly happened over the summer of the last year. And throughout the whole process, we've been able to have a lot of community leaders, both young alumni, folks that have come through the district to share even past experiences on how they've come to this district and to board meetings to pass legislation and to pass policies. Drafting policy recommendations for youth is something that's very foreign. Oftentimes, we are teaching youth that they should just be bystanders and that they should just kind of see a system flow them by. With Learn Commission, we gave each individual student the opportunity to know that they have the power to create the change that they want to see in their district. I am very proud for the work that they've each conducted. Learn Commission was compiled by 4 subcommissions. PAUSD was one of them, and as you heard from them tonight, they would really like to see the board support in moving forward with microaggressions, not only for staff and faculty, but for the students, and not only a one-time thing. Oftentimes when folks are hired into the district, they are expected to take some kind of training around equity and racial equality, but that is not enough. As they mentioned, it needs to happen more than once. If it can happen twice or 3 times a year, even better. Especially with this current moment that we're living into and life being virtual, there's also many incidents that continue to happen in these schools, and the students have no infrastructure to report when a microaggression occurs. I encourage the board to build an infrastructure so that the students can feel safe if they don't feel comfortable going to speak to a teacher about a microaggression. And if and when a teacher or faculty member is the aggressor, that there is a system or a person in place in the institution that gives them that safety, that they can come to them and share what's going on and have the support of not only the principals of the schools, but of the board as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Kelda Jameson on Zoom. No, not there. Next is Gina Del Folco, and I apologize. You'll gather I'm not good at pronouncing names generally, but so I apologize to everybody whose name is mispronounced. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Gina Del Foco, and I am a first grade teacher, a teacher of reading. And I would like to hear the board respond to the December 13th letter from PAEA. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Meb Steiner on Zoom.
Good evening. This is Meb Steiner. Tonight I speak simply as a community member. I, like many, I think, have been deeply disturbed by things that are going on around our nation. And this is tying in actually to our students who have spoken about microaggressions. and then also not so microaggressions that have occurred in our school community. But I feel that we cannot be silent when there is blatant hate, calls to violence, exclusion of people because of their gender or sexual orientation or their race, and book bans that are preventing the true history to be taught. I feel we cannot be silent just because they're not happening in our community in sort of egregious ways that are blatantly obvious. I feel we must denounce such efforts. And I urge us to think how we as a community can stand up to all of this and affirm our commitment to inclusion, tolerance, acceptance, and respect and value of diversity because it strengthens us. Even though we are not banning books, or we are not yelling at board members, or we are not blatantly spewing hate, our kids are impacted by this. Just as if there is a school shooting in Florida or somewhere else, our kids feel it. And I just think how our students, our LGBTQ community, our African-American students are feeling right now that in their country, things like this are happening. And I urge us to speak up and urge us as a community to take action. I personally rise today to denounce these efforts and affirm my commitment to acceptance of all of our students. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any of the speakers who we couldn't find earlier? Nope. Okay. So that concludes open forum. Next item.
Mr. Delbert, can I just make a quick comment?
Of course. Yeah.
I couldn't hear you on the mic.
Oh, yeah, hello? Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. I just really quickly want to address what I think is sort of the elephant in the room that people have requested a comment, and I just wanted to share my thinking real quick. I've been on this board for 5 years, and for probably 3 to 4 of them, once I got my bearings and we had settled with the superintendent and what, I've kind of been up here yelling about systemic inequity, right? I've been up here yelling about anti-racism work and whatnot. And for a very long time, I mean, I wasn't certainly the only one in the district. There were teachers, there were some staff members, but I didn't have a majority of this board on board with that work. And I kept yelling it. And there were times I think people thought I had 7 heads, but I felt really strongly that this was work that we had. It was clear to me that this was work that we needed to do. I am not an expert in the field. I am not trained in it. But I saw it as a board member and felt really important that I keep talking about it. I couldn't get a majority of the board. Maybe I just wasn't very effective in the work I was doing, but I was trying. And I finally, fought to get some other people elected and keep talking to humans. And George Floyd happened. I mean, I think a lot of things happened, but we are now at a place where this entire board is on board with that work. And thanks to many, many people in this room for that. But here we are, where now it is really central to what we are doing. I'm so thrilled that these students stood up and spoke here tonight. And it's so central to so many aspects of what we're doing at the site level, at the district level. It's woven throughout our curricular work. It's woven throughout our wellness work. It is everywhere. And there's much more to do. But we're on that path and we have a plan. And I think soon we're going to see this SWIFT plan. And when I think about the fact that if when I was in the minority and I did not have a majority of the board wanting to do systemic equity work, if I had been silenced by the rest of the board, not only would it have been very upsetting, but I don't think we ever would have gotten here. So when I look at some things that have been published by my colleague, I would say I agree with almost none of it. There is very little of it that I am on board with. But I think it's really important that even if someone is in a minority in their thinking, they still get to speak up and say what they think our students need. I do know that all 5 people up here want our children to succeed and want to raise our test scores and want to do this work. Some of us think that the test scores are the problem. Some of us think the test scores are a symptom of the problem. Either way, we're working in a similar direction. So although I don't agree with that work, I do not think that it's the the role of the board to shut down another board member who is advocating for something that they believe in. And do I love the way it's done? No, I have made that clear. But if I had been shut down because I was going on and on about how we're asking kids of color to swim against the current and we're not helping them, we're not stopping the current, and if I had been shut down, I don't know where we would be. So that is my thinking on this. I think it's really complicated, but I am grateful that the board never shut me down when I was in the minority. And so that's where I sit on this.
Thank you. Let's move on then to our next item, which is the approval of the consent calendar. The consent calendar is, items on the consent calendar are approved as a group with no discussion. If there is discussion, if anybody either on the board or in the community wants to comment on an item on the consent calendar, then we pull it and place it on the action agenda. I don't see any members of the community who want to speak on any of the consent items. Are there any board members who want to pull any of these items for discussion?
I move the consent calendar as presented.
A second.
So the consent calendar is moved and seconded. Student board members, preferential vote.
Aye.
Board members, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The consent calendar is approved unanimously. The next item on our agenda is item 5A under action items, the award of a contract for construction of a multipurpose room at El Carmelo. Mr. Holm, do you want to take this or?
Yes.
Okay.
Good evening, board. Tonight, we are bringing back the El Carmelo multipurpose building project bid to award the contract to Cal Pacific Construction. The bid amount was $8.6 million. We had 3 bids. The third one was actually submitted late, so it was technically non-responsive. But we had a range, 8.6 to 10 million for the price of the project. We're asking for authorization to proceed with Cal Pacific, include the change order allowance of 10% in the contract amount, and actually adjust the El Carmelo project budget by an additional $1.1 million, 1.159. That adjustment will come out of the Measure A Elementary Reserve Fund.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Holm?
So just to clarify, the 1.1 million adjustment is increasing the budget?
Correct, yes.
Okay. And is that because the bids came in over budget? Why the budget increase?
Yeah, they came in slightly over budget, and the way everything tied to the budget is percentages of it. So it doesn't mean that the overall bid was 1.1 over the initial estimate, but it means that the amount overage plus all the compounding change order allowance and other things.
Change orders, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then last question, you said there were 3 bids and 1 was unresponsive?
Yes, that's correct.
So there were only 2 responsive bids?
2 official bids, yes.
Does that reflect the current bidding environment, or is it something about this project?
We were surprised there. So this is the third time this project's gone out to bid, which we typically don't like to sort of reissue, although, due to the past year and a half, it's been a complicated project. We did have 3 bids last time. The number 2 and number 3 bidder did not submit bids on this project.
Wow.
We think because they probably looked at their bids compared to the low bidder and realized they wouldn't be competitive again. The low bidder last time was again the low bidder this time. Their number did increase a little bit. So we think the other bidders were new. And so we think that it's a reflection of partially market conditions, partially the bidders saying, I'm not going to try again. This other contractor's got me beat. The low bidder is a little more innovative in how they structure things. They do a lot of self-perform work, so they are hard to compete with.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
If you're prepared for a motion?
Sure.
I move we approve the contract award as presented.
I'll second. Second.
Okay, any more questions or discussion before we vote? Student board members, preferential vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Board members, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. The next item on our agenda is item 6A and under discussion items, which is a resolution regarding the issuance of some general obligation bonds. And that is,
President Dauber, should we try to, is it possible to do A and B together there? Is it appropriate?
yeah, that seems reasonable. Why don't we hear about and, well, there's no action to be taken. Why don't we hear about A and B together if that's amenable? Ms. Chow?
Thank you, Mr. Dauber. We can certainly do them together. There is a bit of a distinguishing between the two, and I will just lump those together. So these next two items are the resolution to issue bonds for Measures A and Measure Z. Both items are for discussion this evening, and they'll be brought back to the February 22nd board meeting for approval. Measure A funds were last issued in June of 2018. The Measure Z funds were last issued in July of 2019. During that time, the facilities team has been moving forward with existing projects and continuing to work on all design phases, even while construction was paused on our elementary projects. We are at a point now where we need additional capital to continue with our project list and move these larger projects into the construction phases, as we just saw from Mr. Holmes' last item. For Measure A, we're recommending to issue the balance in the final series of the $38 million. For the issuance on Measure Z is $240 million. The projects included in these two issuance are larger scale projects and are therefore reflected in the larger issuances. Some of the examples of the projects included in this round are Hoover at $73 million, the Gunn ABK project at $31 million, Palo Verde at $25 million, and the Pali Tower Building and the Escondido projects at $20 million each. We have a detailed project list to support the spin down within our 3-year time limit, and we have reviewed this in detail with the property committee. For our discussion tonight, we have Ms. Chris Hyatt, Director at Keegan Advisors, who will present the details on the bond issuance. And some of those items include tax rates, interest rates, assessed valuations, and the timeline for issuing following this meeting. Also, Mr. David Casnocha from Stradling Law is the district's bond counsel, and he's prepared all of the legal documents. He's also on hand to answer any questions of this nature from the board. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Hyatt to get us started with the information on the bond issuance.
Good evening, and thank you for the introduction. Can you all see my screen before I begin?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you for having us again tonight. I'm here tonight to talk about the next issuance of Measure A and Measure Z bonds. So before we start talking about the bond issuance themselves, I wanted to give a brief update on interest rates. Interest rates are still near historic lows, although we have seen some fairly sizable increases here in the first month and a half of 2022. The chart on the left on this slide shows a 50-year history of the bond buyer general obligation bond index. And you can see just how low interest rates are now compared to the highs we saw in the early 80s. The chart on the right shows just a 2-year history starting in January of 2020. And you'll see a lot of volatility starting in March of 2020. That's a result of COVID-19 coming into the United States. And then over to the far right-hand side, just this last month, you see a large increase of interest rates. That's a direct result of the inflation that we're seeing, historically high inflation over the last few decades, and the expected rate hikes from the Fed. There's a lot of disagreement as to how much the Fed will increase interest rates this year. Some analysts predict 3 interest rate increases, some say 7, and there's a lot of question as to the amount. But because of that fear, investors are building in an increase in anticipation of those rate hikes. We also have some information down here just to show, although rates have increased, we're still fairly low from a historical perspective. So still definitely a good time to be selling bonds. On this next slide, we have a summary of the district's assessed valuation. The assessed valuation is the value of all taxable property within the district's boundaries. And this is important because the taxes levied on the property within your boundaries repay the bonds that the districts sell. So we have here your total assessed valuation for this fiscal year, which hit an all-time high of 48.2 billion. And this was growth of 4.28% over the prior year. And we also included your annualized growth rates, your historical averages, the 5-year all the way up to the 35-year, all well over the 6% rate, which is very high compared to many other districts in the state of California. Definitely a strong growing tax base from which to repay your bonds. On slide 3, we have a summary of the remaining Measure A. As Carolyn mentioned, these bonds were approved back in 2008, and you've issued 340 million of the 378 approved by your voters, which leaves 38 million left to be sold. To issue these bonds, we're assuming current interest bonds only, so no capital appreciation bonds, an estimated interest rate of about 2.6%, and we're assuming assessed valuation growth rates of 2% next year, 3% the year after, and 4% annually thereafter. So those rates are very conservative to the assessed valuation growth history we saw on the prior page. And lastly, we're using the delinquency rates that the county also assumes. The actual issuance highlighted in yellow would be sold and funds released in April of this year for 38 million at a total cost of about 51 million, which is a repayment ratio of 1.33 to 1, which comes in far below the maximum allowed by law, 4 to 1. And then at the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the impact to the tax rate. A very minimal impact over the next few years, with most of the bonds being repaid in 2034 and 2035. On the next slide, similar information, but this time for Measure Z. So for Measure Z, we're planning to issue approximately 240 million. Again, current interest bonds only, a rate of about 2.7%, and similar AV growth rates and delinquency rates. And again, a repayment ratio 1.33 to 1, and the tax rate shown on the bottom right-hand side of the page. Overall, we have this slide to show the aggregate projected tax rates. This is when you combine all of the district's bond measures, Measure B, Measure A, and Measure Z. And you can see that tax rates are expected to remain relatively stable until 2035, where we'll drop off as some of the older bonds mature. And lastly, in terms of timeline, we're here tonight just to review the financings and answer any questions you may have. And we've also included the documents that David Kasnoka prepared. We'll come back to the board on February 22nd for approval. And then from there, the documents would be sent to the counties or the Board of Supervisors for approval on March 8th. And in the meantime, we would meet with Moody's and Standard & Poor's to update the district's credit ratings. And I'll take this as an opportunity to pat the district on the back, where the district does have AAA ratings from both Moody's and Standard & Poor's, which are the highest possible ratings from both rating agencies. So kudos to Palo Alto for achieving those ratings. Lastly, we would plan to sell the bonds in March 16th, with a closing scheduled for April 6th. And that's when the district would actually receive the funds. And that's all I have for you tonight. Are there any questions on these slides?
Any questions? Mr. Collins?
This is more comment from Ms. Chow. It would be great if in the future we get these slides in advance and be able to review and ask questions. Were they distributed? I didn't see them, but.
Mr. Collins?
Maybe I didn't.
I'm just confirming. I believe that went to you all on February 1st.
As an email? I didn't.
Yep.
Okay, I apologize.
I just checked that also.
I didn't see that. So yeah, if it could be attached to the item for future reference, I think that would be great. It would be, a couple things. One is, I think it is good that we have a AAA rating. That's a reflection of our community's property value versus anything that, mostly versus things the district does. So I want to congratulate the community on having a very large property value base. That's the primary basis of our AAA rating. Though management is also a factor involved in that. Yeah, it would be good. This is coming back in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It would be good to be able to dig into that analysis and make sure we're doing that. We achieved a very a very attractive bond economics. Our payback ratios were, I think, the smallest in California at one point because we were paying back so aggressively. And it would be good to see with all these additional draws, kind of how that fits in, because it was not always thus. So it would be good to see. All right, apologies that I didn't see the February 1st email. And it would be good if we could get it attached to the item for future reference. That would be great, so that and the community has access to it.
Okay, any other questions on these slides? Ms. Chow, do you have more that you wanted to present before we conclude our discussion?
No, this was the full summary of both of these two items, and unless the board had further questions, that summarizes this item. And it will come back at the next board meeting, and I will provide additional information to the board to give insight into some of those questions.
Okay, that's great. Anyone else? Okay, thank you so much, and thank you to our guests.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item for discussion is 6C, authorization to bid Measure Z bond products. Mr. Holm?
Hello again. So we're doing something a little unusual tonight in that we are combining 6 projects in one for authorization. This is a little ahead of time, and we're doing this as primarily because we have several of these projects in the pipeline that are all coming out of DSA in the next 1 to 2 months. Some a little bit longer than that, but then I also, due to the current climate of construction and supply chain issues, we are looking at some of these projects. Typically, if they were going to bid in the summer, maybe they'd be bidding in, or going to be constructed in the summer, maybe they would bid in May. Is the day it comes out of DSA, we're going to bid it because we want to get the contractors under contract and starting their procurement process as soon as possible. So really, we want to sort of get this hurdle out of the way to be able to be as quick and nimble as possible when we have approval. So we've grouped the Palo Verde multipurpose and classroom building project that you will recall is the one we are moving the students to Greendale for. The classroom wing at Fletcher Middle School, the JLS admin and library, the gun building ABK renovation, as well as the temporary administration movement of both gun ABK and Pally Tower, and then a fire alarm project at Addison Elementary School.
Okay, so any comments or questions on this item? Ms. Costa?
Yeah, I just had a quick question about the Pally and Guns temporary admin projects. So it says it costs $100,000 to $150,000 for both of those projects. Is that just for relocating admin into the portables at both Gun and Pally?
That's correct. Admin and associated functions in those buildings that are going to be remodeled.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? And I hear a little bit of urgency. Is staff looking for us to waive the 2-meeting rule on this item, Mr. Holm?
No.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Mr. Collins?
Before we move on to the next item, I want to promptly correct my error. While I asked for that item to be attached, both sent in advance, and I was wrong on that, and attached to the board item. And it turned out it was attached to one item, but not the other, but it's already in the board packet. So my apologies to Ms. Chow. Thank you very much for getting that out.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Holm, and we will see this item back in 2 weeks for approval.
Thank you.
Next is, we'll move to staff reports. The first of those is 7A, 2022-23 draft budget assumptions. Ms. Chow?
All right, thank you, Mr. Dauber. This next item is the first draft of our budget assumptions that we'll be using for the development of our 22-23 district budget. This first draft contains the updates from the governor's proposed budget, which was released last month in January. Staff will continue to meet and incorporate budget proposals into this document, and then revisions will be incorporated into budget adoption, budget assumptions, and then come back to the board for review and further discussion. We're planning to have a final approval of this document in April. Since a good portion of the district's budget is informed by the state's budget, Dr. Austin and I thought the timing was right to have a presentation for the board with a brief overview of the governor's proposed budget related to the state budget. So we are very fortunate to have Ms. Michelle McKay Underwood, Vice President at School Services of California, with us this evening. School Services of California, for those of you who are not familiar, does the very important work of advocating for school districts at the state level for everything ranging from education issues, fiscal matters, to special ed, and just about everything you can imagine in between. Ms. Underwood leads this premier team in her advocacy work at the state capitol, and tonight she's going to present us with some of the highlights from the governor's proposed budget. Michelle, would you like to get us started on your presentation?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and I hope you can hear me okay. I appreciate the invitation to be with you today, and I see that my opening slide is up there on the screen, so I won't worry about sharing my screen, and I'll get us started. I know you have many things to discuss today, and what Ms. Chow already provided as an overview, I will be hitting the highlights of the governor's budget proposal for the upcoming year, 2022-23. And just as a brief reminder of the process, the governor kicks things off in January with his proposals. The legislature continues that conversation through legislative hearings, and then ultimately the budget is adopted as a compromise and an agreement between the governor and the legislature. But this is the starting point for that process. And so in the next slide, we will start to look at the big picture for education funding. You always have to start at the Proposition 98 minimum guarantee. For K-12 and community colleges in the state of California, Proposition 98 is what drives the total amount of funding that is provided by the state in order to provide for the education of our K-14 students, as well as some of our preschool programs. Here you see that there is often a difference of opinions when it comes to just how many dollars will be required in that minimum guarantee. The two big players here are the governor's Department of Finance, and you'll see their estimations for Proposition 98 there in the orange, and then the Legislative Analyst's Office in their fiscal projections as well. So as you can see here, there's definitely some daylight between the two financial economic outlooks. And so we may see these numbers change between now and the May revision, and then the ultimate adoption of the budget. And it looks like we may have some room to grow in terms of the Proposition 98 minimum guarantee, both for the current year as revenues come in, as well as for the upcoming year as both of these entities project into the future what funding may be available for K-14. We're in a test 1 year, which is a fairly straightforward calculation. So monies that come into the state of California, education receives about 40% of those dollars. So as more revenues come into the state, that translates very directly into the Proposition 98 minimum guarantee. The next slide goes into the Proposition 98 reserve. Several years back, the voters of California approved Proposition 2, which sets a specific rainy day fund for Proposition 98, again, for K-12 and community colleges. It's called the Public School System Stabilization Account, but most folks commonly refer to it as the Prop 98 Rainy Day Fund. Depending on revenues coming into the state of California, there's a calculation for how many of those revenues need to go into the Prop 98 Rainy Day Fund. And you can see that the formula shows that significant resources will be building up based on that formula over the next several years. There's always in Proposition 98 a period of catch-up. And so you can see that these are estimations for both the upcoming year, the current year, and even back in 2020, 2021. While not in Proposition 2 itself, there is sort of a companion law in the Education Code that says when there is a sufficient reserve fund balance in that Prop 98 rainy day fund of at least 3% of the spending on K-12 in Proposition 98, there will be a cap on local school district reserves in a year in which there is an equivalent of that 3%. And so you see here, the orange bars, once again, is the minimum guarantee. The blue bars shows us what the reserve balance is at the state level, and those green percentages show that indeed that 3% threshold has been met, and therefore the next slide will show you what the reserve cap looks like. While not itself created by SB 751, Senate Bill 751, the original legislation was changed by SB 751 to set that threshold in any year in which sets that cap in place whenever that 3% threshold is met. So once the cap is put into place, district reserves will be capped at 10%, looking at the assigned and unassigned ending fund balance of both general and special reserve funds. SB 751 did make some exceptions, including for community funded districts, as well as for districts that are on the smaller side, those with an average daily attendance of 2501 or fewer. So districts that are not exempt will need to commit resources rather than assign them, move resources to other funds, or they could also seek a waiver from the County Office of Education. So this is the first time that the reserve cap will be put in place. So we'll be seeing lots of those actions in that green square happening around the state as districts think about how to address the reserve cap that will be put in place for the 2022-23 school year. So moving on from the reserve cap to the spending within Proposition 98, in the next slide, you will see that there is always a mix of both one-time and ongoing spending within the Proposition 98 guarantee. Under Governor Brown, it was very predictable that ongoing resources would be dedicated to the local control funding formula. One-time funding would be distributed in a flexible manner, often on a per average daily attendance basis across the state of California. This was beneficial for community funded districts like Palo Alto because those flexible dollars that went out on a one-time basis could be used for your local needs. Under Governor Newsom, we've seen definitely a change in priorities and how those dollars are going out. No longer do we see per ADA flexible dollars going out on a one-time basis. Now both ongoing resources as well as one-time funds is most often restricted and targeted towards certain student populations and school sites and local educational agencies with certain demographics and certain characteristics. And so those proposals will benefit directly those LEAs and school sites with those demographics. And we'll go through today both the proposals that are ongoing and one time, and we'll note where there are certain requirements that would make an LEA eligible for those funds. So here you see the breakdown of ongoing versus one-time spending. The next slide, we will start to get into the very biggest single ongoing proposal, even just marginally bigger than the local control funding formula, is the proposal for the expanded learning opportunity programs, the ELOP. This would be an increase to the current ELO program. The ELO program was created in the 2021-22 state budget, but receives a significant investment under the governor's proposal, an additional $3.4 billion, which brings total funding to $4.4 billion. This is expanded learning opportunity. The idea is to have a full 9 hours of both instruction and oversight and care of a student on campus. There you'll also see some additional one-time fundings, and other after-school programs that are also receiving additional funds under the governor's proposal. And there you see in red, bottom left corner, that the funding for LEAs with higher unduplicated pupil percentages is significantly more than those with lower UPP. So a quick pause to make sure that we're all defining UPP in the same way. Unduplicated pupil percentages, it was a concept created through the LCFF, the Local Controlled Funding Formula, and that is looking at the percentage of an LEA student population that are English learners, are foster youth, or qualify for free and reduced price meals. So the LCFF prioritizes those students through supplemental and concentration grant funding, and we see that concept of more resources going to high UPP districts and school sites reflected through many of these proposals as well. On our next slide, we will be looking at two one-time programs. So the ELO program that we just spoke about is an ongoing program, started this year and continuing into the future. We do now, with those one-time funds that the governor has proposed, see two proposals in the space of early literacy. On the left, $500 million of grants for high-need schools to train and hire literacy coaches and reading specialists. So these would be one-time funds, and again, for school sites with a unduplicated pupil percentage of 95% or higher. So quite a high threshold to qualify for that particular grant. On the right-hand side, we see $200 million for multilingual school or classroom libraries, offering culturally relevant texts. This would be approximately, the administration believes about 2,000 school sites would qualify for these funds under this $200 million grant. And this also has a relatively high threshold to meet the requirements of this program, with at least 80% of students at school sites qualifying for free and reduced price meals and 15% English learner population. So again, these are one-time grants that would go out based on a formula and based on eligibility of LEAs and their schools. In the next slide, we will see a brand new career pathways program. The next two slides focused, the last slide focused on our earliest learners. The next two slides focused on those who are transitioning out of high school and into their careers or into college. So the Career Pathways program would be a brand new pathway program to meet critical job needs. This would be a one-time program over 4 years, $1.5 billion, so pretty significant investment. These pathways would be focused on technology, including green technology, healthcare, education, climate-related fields. This also would be looking at eligibility requirements, lower threshold in terms of unduplicated pupil percentages. So grants would be provided for LEAs with 50% or higher, but also with a combination of higher than average dropout, higher than average suspension and expulsion rates, higher than average, statewide average, I should say, homelessness, and lower than the statewide average A through G completion. So again, we see that the administration is really prioritizing their funds to certain schools and certain LEAs. On the next slide, we will see a dual enrollment proposal. Again, looking at those students who are able to enroll in both college as well as high school at the same time. This would be a $500 million proposal of one-time funds, again, to be spent over several years to strengthen and expand student access and participation in dual enrollment opportunities. And those same priority funding requirements that we talked about with UPP percentages and certain student characteristics, those same will apply here for dual enrollment as well. On the next slide, we'll be talking about transportation. This again is a one-time proposal, $1.5 billion for green electric buses. So each LEA that qualifies would get at least $500,000 for an electric school bus, a charging station, and any other needs that might come along with that electric school bus. Here we see that priority is given to LEAs with the highest concentration of UPT, the oldest internal combustion buses, and for small and rural districts. Again, trying to green the fleet of school buses here in California with $1.5 billion. The next slide here you will see is universal nutrition and student meals. So beginning in 2022-23, as set, excuse me, as set in motion through this year's budget, all LEAs will be required to provide 2 free meals per day to any student who requests a meal, regardless of the student's ability to pay or income. There is an additional pot of funds, $596 million, to fund this universal access to subsidized school meals in recognition that some schools have less infrastructure than before this requirement was put into place. There's $450 million in one-time dollars for LEAs to upgrade their school kitchen infrastructure and equipment to meet the needs of providing 2 meals per day to any student who requests it. In the next slide, you will see special education, another one of the large investments in under the Newsom administration. Several increases provided, you can see over the years, to increase funding for our students with disabilities. This year, in addition to the cost of living adjustment, which as of the governor's proposal was estimated to be 5.33%. In addition to that cost of living adjustment, $500 million is proposed to increase the amount of funding per ADA in special education funds. This would significantly increase the per ADA rate from this year's $715 per ADA up to $820 per ADA, about a 14% increase between that cost of living adjustment and the $500 million investment. In the next slide, you will see these next 2 slides, CalPERS and CalSTRS. We have seen several years of increased employer contribution rates. I do have a little bit of good breaking news on this slide. CalPERS has recently released new projected out year rates for the employer contributions. 2022-23 will be a little bit lower than projected there if approved in April. So these are still projections in the out years, but the numbers will start to come down. So for example, 2022-23, instead of being projected at 26.10%, is now being projected at 25.4%. So still an increase over the current year and nearly a 3% increase, but not quite as much as previously projected. And the numbers actually do start to crest downwards for CalPERS projected rates. Under the next slide, CalSTRS employer contribution rates. These do continue to project upwards. CalPERS will not be updating their rates for another couple of months. We can be hopeful that the contribution rate starting in 22-23 may also benefit from some of the recent gains in the stock market, but those rates tend to not be as volatile as the CalPERS rates. So as of right now, a fairly significant jump expected from this year's rate of the 2021-22 rate of 16.92 up to next year's rate of 19.10. So expecting to see that increase. So on our next slide, I believe we're coming to the end. We just talked about the CalSTRS and CalPERS rates. In past years, the state has provided some help for employers' contribution rates to try and bring them down from projections. We do not see that proposed in this year's budget for school employers. We also know that the Universal Meals Program and the Expanded Learning Opportunities Program can be more costly than what the governor is proposing to fund. So even with the very significant investment in the ELO program and in Universal Meals, we know that it might not be sufficient funds for everyone who's required to offer those programs. So this hopefully gives you a good starting point, along with the information, of course, that you'll be getting from Ms. Chow to start your discussions for the creation of your budget for the upcoming 2022-23 year. Again, we're just starting the process here in Sacramento with many months to come in the future and many conversations to be had before the July 1 start of the next fiscal year. And thank you very much again for having me this evening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Underwood. That was a very interesting and enlightening presentation. Any comments or questions from board members?
I have one question. Thank you, Ms. Underwood. I can't see her, so it's sort of odd. She's
I
still
can
there.
see you.
There you are, there you are. Okay, good, good, good. I just wondered, to help us with our budget planning, do you happen to have any information that we might not have about the future of independent study and remote learning and what might be required of school districts going forward?
Yes, and there will definitely, under the governor's proposal, continue to be a requirement to offer independent study. There are many discussions that are going to be taking place for how to adjust this year's program and into the future. I definitely don't have the answers for where it will end up, but we do know that the intention is for that to continue to be a requirement on districts going forward.
Thank you.
Mr. Dauber, can I add one piece? First of all, thank you very much, Ms. Underwood, for being with us tonight, one of the legends from school services. So really appreciate, I was excited when I saw your name there. She hit on it quickly, but I just want to underscore the massive, massive shift from Governor Brown to Governor Newsom as far as how money comes out. I want to give you a very, very concrete difference. Today, we received information that we had received a grant for A through G completion assistance for students, about $500,000, about $500,000. We received that today around, 3 o'clock. It has an April 1st deadline to have board approval on this plan that we didn't know we were going to receive until about 3 o'clock this afternoon. That is the new way of business in California. That is how this money is coming in left and right. And I really appreciate her highlighting some of the way the money comes in, very categorical-like, with extreme reporting measures, very compliance-based, completely different than Jerry Brown's vision of local control funding formulas. And this is one of the things I think people aren't talking about enough. And if you'd like to tag on to that, Ms. Underwood, feel free. Otherwise, I just thought that was worth underscoring.
Yes, you're definitely right there, Superintendent. A very different approach to funding education in California under Governor Newsom compared to Governor Brown. And I did go through the biggest pots of funds proposed for 22-23. There were other smaller ones. And this is actually less, significantly less than the number of proposals that were made and put into this year's budget. As you noted, there are so many that came through in the 21-22 year. I think there's a little bit of the state reacting to that. And so this is actually marginally fewer proposals than sort of a normal year under Governor Newsom. I think in such strong reaction to districts dealing with so much, let alone all the different grants that the state may want districts to apply for or plan for or create plans around. So I completely agree.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Thank you so much, Ms. Underwood, for your comments and for your time. Ms. Chow, anything else on this item?
No, again, I just would like to thank Ms. Underwood. Captured all the highlights, and it was very nice to hear it in the synopsized form rather than the 3-hour version. And I think it was very informative. So thank you again.
My
Mr.
pleasure.
Dauber, this was the time that we were going to just very quickly, we don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but if the board has items that they want us to to consider, and we don't even need board majority on this. This would just be I'd be interested in you bringing us back some information about something for future budget assumptions, which appear in our next agenda. This would be the time to just share those thoughts, and we can take notes.
Right. Mr. Branza.
Thanks. Thank you all for that. Thank you, Ms. Underwood and Ms. Chow. I am happy to see the budget assumptions that you all laid out, and I had a couple of questions and maybe requests for us to consider. I believe that there is probably a detailed PD budget coming to us. Obviously I don't see anything in there, but I just want to make sure it's clear that these assumptions include serious support in next year, right? I mean, especially at our elementary level with all the new stuff being adopted. But also, you heard students speak up today how desperately they want our staff to get more professional development about the anti-racism work and the microaggression stuff. And none of that is one-shot deals, right? It's all ongoing. So I'm hoping that when we see a more detailed budget, we're looking at TOSAs and literacy specialists and work somehow baked in about anti-racism and whatnot. And I know you're already doing some UDL. I think that's potentially a pretty big ticket when you look at all that stuff. So I'm excited to see that. And I cannot mention math too, obviously that's one we want to include. And the other thing, just as you know, I go to the sustainability committee meetings, and I've spoken with you sometimes about this, that with that cut that had to happen a couple of years ago, there is some work that I think isn't being done. And I know staff is working really hard to try to cover it all, but I would love to see an addition of at least some fraction of an FTE to help make sure that work gets done. That's all I've got.
If you're okay, I'd rather, unless we need to clarify, I think we're just taking notes right now and not responding to each one, but we heard everything you just said. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
I have some.
Yes,
Okay.
Vladimir.
First, I just want to second Mr. Brienza's call for literacy TOSAs and specialists, whatever we need to make sure that wonderful plan that we're implementing, and I include the dyslexia plan in that at the secondary level. And second, mental health. We've talked about counselors and maybe additional psychologists, mental health professionals. I understand it's hard to find them, but I would just ask that staff make sure we have sufficient money in the budget so we are prepared to jump when we can find them, and that we're really evaluating what our needs are and how much that's going to cost. And then my final comment is middle school learning center. This was planned at one point, this was planned as part of an effort to continue to expand our continuum of special education services. And I would just ask staff to look at this again now as the budget's being developed. Where are we with this? Do we still need it? And should it be included in our planning?
Yes.
I was gonna also speak to mental health. And again, we've had staffing problems with psychologists because of the services we've used. So to the extent there's room in the budget for just evaluating what other supports we can put in, notwithstanding the staffing issues, that's something I'd like to see too.
Other comments? Okay, I think that's it. Thank you. Thank you for that item. Let's then move on to 7B under staff reports.
President Auber, I think there's a public comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see it before. Thank you. Got it. We have one public comment on this item, which is from Meb Steiner on Zoom. Ms. Steiner.
Good evening. Thank you. Meb Steiner, president of CSEA. I just want to start off by saying thank you for the presentation. The budget is always so important, and the classic cliche, show me your budget, it'll show me your values and your priorities. I just want to start off by just emphasizing how important people are. And I have said this many, many times, our programs and our buildings are all hollow shells without our people. And that is why there is a good reason why 80 to 85% of our budget is on our personnel. And it is all of our amazing staff that we need to recognize. And I especially want to lift up the voices of our classified staff because we very much support the programs that are priorities in our district. And it is very difficult to say what we should focus on. It's hard to choose. There are so many amazing areas that we support in, but I'd like to highlight a couple of things to consider as we think about our budget moving forward. One area is our special education aides. I really am so excited with the first step of the stipends for our aides who support our mod severe students with toileting, with medical needs, with mental and emotional supports. I think we need to differentiate so we can better target and meet the needs of our many needs of our different students in mod severe, mild mod. Consistent hours to allow for training, collaboration, prepping of material. And I urge us to focus a little on that. Food service, I cannot say enough about them. They have been champions from day one with the pandemic. Since the legislation was passed, they this last year have tripled the meals they have produced with the same staffing, the same hours, and at times shorthanded. They are incredible. We need to find some support for them in terms of hours, people. They are critical to our student wellness. If they are well fed, they will learn better. Transportation, another great area. Very tough job, hardest job in the district. Nowhere else are you asked to be alone with 60 students and drive a bus. It's hard to recruit and retain. I want to thank the district for the MOU with the healthcare benefits, which you'll see in your info items. It is a wonderful first step. We have some amazing opportunities here to have career ladders, to have an academy, to look at some career technical education. I also want to support the mental health aspect. We have leaned heavily on our counselors. By the way, happy counseling week. Our mental health folks, our wellness folks, and we will lean on them heavily to increase our capacity so that we can support them as much as they support us. And I do also want to raise the issue of all the massive increases we've had in tech support with independent learning, with remote learning, with—
Ms. Steiner, you're out of time, but.
Oh, sorry, there was no
feel free to
clock. I didn't see a clock.
No, that's fine. If you'd like to send your comments to the board too, of course, we're happy to hear them.
Yes,
at
absolutely.
board@uoc.org.
Thank you. And I want to just say a big thank you to PI for emphasizing wellness in their fundraising. The community is so important. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Okay, our next item is item 7B under staff reports, which is audits regarding measures A and Z. Ms. Chow?
So for this item, I'd like to have our Director of Bond Projects and Construction, Mr. Eric Holm, come up, and he will present that information.
We're actually going to kick this. We have Joyce Peters from Ide Bailey that is going to, we're going to promote her to a speaker, and she will actually present the audit. You're not seeing her? Oh.
Can anybody hear me?
Hi, Joyce. Yes.
Oh, hi. We've already gone through the these two report with the CBOCs before we issue it in details. Now today I basically is just going over the conclusion of our audits and answer any questions if you have any. In your packets there's two bond reports. One is Measure A and one is Measure Z. For Measure A1 is the result of election 2008, authorized the districts to issue 378 million. During the year, the district spent approximately 8.8 million, leaving a fund balance of 35.3 million for next year to spend. This Measure A financial, in your package, each report has two, actually it's two type of audit. The first, for Measure A, the first 18 pages is the financial statement audit, and then the remaining is a performance audit. For financial audit, we look and see if there's a misrecording and the expenditures is recording in the proper period. For this report, we issue a modified report with no material weakness and significant deficiencies, which means it's a clean audit and there's no proposed audit adjustment and findings. For performance audit, it started from page 19 of the bond reports. For performance audit, we go into more detail with the invoices, looking at the invoices and see where it was spent and spent on what. And then match those things with the bond language or the ballot language and the approved projects. Of this one, we selected approximately 7.4 million non-payroll transactions and 346 payroll transactions, totally approximately 7.7 million. With this amount, we didn't find any exceptions. All the sample we selected, they represent 88% of the total expenditures. And no exceptions on this one as well. For next report, which is Measure Z. Measure Z is the result of 2018 elections, authorized the district to issue 460 million bonds. As of today, the district issued 30 million. During the year, the district spent 10 million, 13.3 million on these bond projects, and leaving 12.1 million for next year to spend. For the Measure Z financial statements, it is also a modified report with no material weakness and significant deficiencies. It's also a clean audit. For performance audit, was selected 10 million expenditures of non-payroll expenditures and 446 payroll expenditures. We didn't find any exceptions as well. So of this amount represent approximately 79% of the total expenditures. And we didn't have any findings on this performance audit as well. Any questions?
Board members, any questions regarding the audits? Great, thank you so much, Ms. Peters, for your hard work and for your presentation.
Okay, and then finally, I do like to appreciate the bond departments. They are very patient with almost like $20 million invoices to pull. Your district is very patient and very efficient. Usually when we select the sample, they have the invoices uploaded second day or very soon. So I really appreciate your staff. Thank you.
That's great to hear. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Then we will move on to item 7C, which you'll recall was moved from item 8B, the Bond Citizens Oversight Committee report on measures A and Z. Ms. Chow or Mr. Holm?
Actually, I'll invite up our Bond Oversight Committee Chair, Ms. Vaidya.
Thank you, Eric. Hi, I'm Prerna Vaidya, and I continue to serve as the chair of the Citizens Oversight Committee for the fiscal year ending June 2021. I'm here with Tom Siegel, who served as the vice chair of the committee during the same term. On behalf of all of our colleagues on the committee, along with the findings of the professional accounting firm, I. Bailey, who presented just now, I'm pleased to report that to the best of our knowledge, the disbursement of funds in the past year under the district's Strong Schools Bond program has been consistent with the use of funds identified in the Measure A 2008 Strong Schools Bond, or Measure A, and 2018 Strong Schools Bond, or Measure Z. And we believe that the district has also fulfilled its responsibilities under Prop 39 and Article 13A, Section 1BC3 of the California State Constitution, the section that governs the administration of school bonds like Measure A and Measure Z. This is my 6th year on the committee. Thank you all. And over this period, I have been privileged to witness the transformation of the school infrastructure in our wonderful district and construction of some of the best facilities in this part of the world, thanks to the leadership of the board and the faithful stewardship of the professional team led by Bob Golton, who's no longer with the program, but he served dutifully during the entire term. Ron Smith, Eric Holm, Todd Collins, and others from the district office in partnership with Tom Hodges and his colleagues from F3S Hodges. Actually, it's called FS3 Hodges. The bond program is now led by Eric Holm, and I believe that we are in good hands going forward. Thank you all. Any questions? Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to say, I'm so glad you're here. I, in fact, last night thought you guys weren't going to be here, and I wrote you an email. I'm glad I procrastinated sending it because now I get to say it in person.
Actually, good to be here in person. Last year it was all virtual. So.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah. I'm thrilled that you're back again. You know, I think the Bond Oversight Committee has been a vital part of what has been, you know, one of the shining lights of the district the last, well, now going on now 13 years since we passed the bond in 2008, and it's been an exceptionally high quality program. And I think the Bond Oversight Committee, where we've been blessed to have really strong oversight committees that both help oversee the project, perform a statutory function, but also I think perform a very provide a very important sounding board for the management team and the bond program team on kind of how to think about things, how the community will react to things. And I think that's been part of the formula for success of the program running so smoothly. And I really urge you guys, you know, as the bond enters a new generation, if you will, with new leadership and changes in some of our approaches, things like the Palo Verde project, where we're moving into Greendale and trying to do that project much faster and a potentially much higher level of spending and project pace, that the Oversight Committee, I think, needs to continue to play a really important role in making sure that they're keeping an eye on those things and providing that sounding board to the management team. Because it's, you know, I think everybody wants to do the right thing and have things go well. It's just hard to know. It's lonely. Mr. Holm has a long job. Ms. Chow has a lonely job. It's hard to do these jobs, and it's great to have partners like our community partners on the Bond Oversight Committee. So I think you guys have done a fabulous job, and I'm sure you'll continue to do a fabulous job. Though it sounds like this is the last time we'll see you, because if I recall, 6 years is the term limit. Yeah.
Right.
So thank you very much for your service over 6 long years. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I echo your sentiments completely. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to echo my colleagues' comments. It's a great service to the community, and I think a great reassurance to the community, which is providing, trusting the district with hundreds of millions of dollars of funding, and to have community members stand up and say that the district is spending that money well is a really vital part of the ability of the district to keep going back and getting the funds needed to build great facilities. So thank you so much for all of that. Anything else on this item? No, then let us move on to our, let me just make sure I'm not making a mistake. On to our information items, which we will take as a group and ask if there's a comment on any of these items.
Are you going in order or just?
Characteristically, I want to comment on C, D, and E.
Okay, anybody want to comment on?
Sounds like you're killing me.
I want D.
I want D as well.
D, I want D. He's the winner.
Anybody on item A?
I was going to, actually, I'd be happy to comment on A as well.
Well, I'm not pleading with you to comment on it, but if you have something to say, you should feel free to say it.
All right, I'll comment briefly on A. Which
Go right ahead.
I do agree with Ms. Steiner, Union President Steiner, who called in, who I think it's fantastic that we're able to provide full-time position and full benefits for the bus drivers, which, as we know, if we ever were unsure, we found out how vital that was when the supply chain on drivers became so thin this year, and they are a vital link in our students being able to access school. So I'm delighted to see that, and I hope it helps enrich our staffing pool and provide kind of the stability of that job that people need to do well. So thank you.
Thank you. And in fact, Ms. Steiner heard you mention her name, and now she's on Zoom and would like to comment on that item. So
There you go.
Ms. Steiner.
Yes, Meb Steiner again, CSEA president. I just wanted to say thank you for this MOU. Our membership will be voting on it later this week, and I am very, very hopeful that it will pass. I think that we all, through the pandemic, as Mr. Collins just said, have recognized kind of how essential some of our folks are, and certainly our bus drivers, and getting our kids to school is critical. Without them being there, we cannot educate them. So I just wanted to express my thanks about that, and add a little bit more to, because I was kind of going like grease lightning through the budget items. It is really truly one of the toughest jobs, and it is a very difficult position to fill and find. There's a shortage nationwide, and there's a lot of requirements, and it's not like we can get anybody else to do it very quickly. Actually, during COVID, we had our theater techs got certified as bus drivers in order to help out. And so it's really, really critical. So I want to express my thanks to Dr. Austin, to the board, to Mr. Bahadur Singh and Ann Lay in our conversations about getting this MOU for our bus drivers. We're hoping that it helps move the needle, certainly recognizes their value. And I just want to put that out there. I think we also have some amazing opportunities as we've been kind of brainstorming, and I am looking forward to more conversations of, we train our bus drivers. So we have a bus driver training academy that we could create. And our mind started going in directions of how could we like leverage that for CTE or for our kids? How could they benefit from this? Not just only being driven to school, but some wonderful ideas there. So I appreciate the collaboration, and I appreciate the recognition of the importance of our transportation department, and want to thank them and thank all of you for the support.
Thank you, Ms. Steiner. Let's move on then to item C, which is graduation rate and A to G reporting update. Mr. Collins, you wanted to.
I just had a short comment that, I mean, looking at these items, there's some things go up with them, some things go down. I think generally moving in the right direction. The one thing that really struck me is the significant gap, the significant how Palo Alto's A through G graduation rates, particularly for socioeconomically disadvantaged students and English learners, as well as students with disabilities, significantly higher than the state and county averages. And I think that's really telling. I mean, you know, some of us, I know Mr. Dauber remembers this, when it was somewhat controversial and difficult when Palo Alto put the A to G requirement in place. That was not something that everybody was doing. It was not something that districts like ours especially did. And Superintendent Skelly, I think, deserves a lot of credit for really championing that and making sure that it got done. And I think I'm probably going to send him a note, because I think that the results that we see today are the result of good decisions that were made at that time to say we cannot have less than college track requirements for all our students. And, you know, while we haven't achieved that, we haven't achieved getting them all to meet the requirement, we're substantially ahead of similar students in state and county averages. So I think that that was heartwarming to me. It takes a long time to, you know, kind of steer the ship in an organization like this when you've got lots of students, and it takes a long time to educate them, but it was very nice to see that result. That was certainly the intended result when this happened in 2008, 2009.
Thank you. Anyone else on item C? Item D, the DNF report. Mr. Collins,
I think other people, maybe other people will say what I'm going to say, so they can. Didn't you also want to?
I heard a lot of D. Yeah. Ms. Latimer, do you want to go ahead?
Want to start here?
Yeah, let's do that.
I just had two quick comments. One is, I would be interested in knowing if any of the decrease we saw from quarter one to semester one was due to kids dropping the class versus their grades improving. I would like to know if that's statistically significant in any way. And also, I can't speak for my colleagues, but I would also be interested in seeing data on students with 504 plans included in this report. So those are my only comments. I think we're going this way.
Yeah, Mr. Durrell, did you have?
No, I'm fine, thank you. The question's been answered for me.
Mr. Brianza?
Thanks. Thank you for all these reports on the info tonight. For the DF list, there's two things that come to mind. One is when you go into the school level reports, I see the raw numbers by demographic, but it's hard to know what percentages those are, right? Like our African-American students getting a D or an F is really low, but we have a really low number of those students. So I think it would be really helpful to see percentages as well. And the A to G, there's percentages, and high level there was, but when you got into those separate ones, I think for me, it would be helpful to see percentages. And then the other thing is sort of the question I feel like I had last time, and I feel like will always be my curiosity. As we are doing interventions that we think are making a difference, are we figuring out which ones are making a difference, right? We do these interventions. Do we have any sense of the fact that way fewer students got a D or an F as they had at the quarter mark? Did it have to do with the teachers working one-on-one with them? Did it have to do with, I saw in Gunn's report that for every student on that list, there is an adult on site that is assigned to that student, right? Does that make a difference? I just want us to really see if we can identify what is in fact making a difference. That's all.
No, I thought maybe there was going to be a response to that.
No, just,
okay.
I mean, I don't know if you have a response to that, but I'm guessing that I would like to see moving forward in these reports if we do have a sense of, wow, this really was the most effective thing we did, or from last year, this seemed to make a difference, so we're going to double down on that this year. Yeah.
Okay. The one thing I wanted to add is, and this, I know you added an exhibit kind of after it was posted, and I want to make sure everybody saw it, because it was very useful to look at this in the context of prior years. And you did add the prior year exhibit, so thank you very much for that. And it did show, I mean, to me, that, you know, the numbers are what they are. It's hard, are they good, are they bad? Hard to say. But in compared to prior years, I think virtually all the schools had gone down substantially from the first time we benchmarked this in 2017. And in fact, we're down meaningfully from the 2019 numbers. And so, you know, it's always nice to see the numbers moving in the right direction, especially when they move in unison, because it suggests that's something that maybe we're doing that's having a good effect, and it may just be the passage of time and focus and emphasis on this. You know, what gets measured gets managed. So that was a useful exhibit, and A, I hope you'll include it in the future, but B, I think it said that things were moving in the right direction.
Mr. Dauber, I have one comment.
Go right ahead. Yeah.
It's hard to look at the data and sort of just opine on it, because we get it frequently and it's good to have, but you know, I really want to see this tied to some action at some point. And so when we get something on the SWIFT report and the promise, I know a lot of this is tied to the work that the BEOC did. That will be more of a helpful discussion to have.
Any other comments? My only comment is that there's a pretty significant difference between the schools, particularly the middle schools, which suggests that there's some headroom there for some of the middle schools to further reduce Ds and Fs. I'm sure you've noticed that, and I'm sure that work is happening. Yeah, okay. All right, let's move then to item E on the CASP results. I believe there was a desire to have a comment or question on that. Mr. Collins?
That was me again, sorry.
Yeah.
Dr. Austin, were you able to look at any of the subgroup analysis? We see the high-level analysis here. Was there subgroup analysis that you looked at?
Yeah. I'm going to go beyond yes. We definitely looked at the subgroup information, and I'm going to just touch a little bit, and then I'm going to ask Ms. Ofek to jump in here with me. statewide, the guidance is to try to make the same kind of meeting in comparison with other school districts. But we did not only look at our data as a whole, but also looked at our subgroups because our participation rates are really good. So I'm going to let Ms. Ofek talk about the subgroup just a little bit, and I think she's going to say everything that I would have said, but only better. So Ms. Ofek, go ahead and give it a shot.
All right, I'll give it a shot. So I will say that the caution is to, when you look at this data to compare, when you compare yourself to others is very cautionary, but with our high participation rates for all the grades, with the exception of grade 11, we can do a nice comparison of ourselves to ourselves in previous years. And when you do look at that, we do see similar outcomes for our student groups that we have highlighted to monitor and look at progress or make efforts to improve that progress. So the student groups that that we are, some people refer to as subgroups, we are looking at, unfortunately performed relatively similar to previous years, which actually maybe isn't so unfortunate given the circumstances that we had a relatively similar outcome from previous years. But it is not at the level at which we are striving for or want for our students. So when you do drill into it and you compare ourselves to ourselves, I would say eliminate 11th grade because that had a very significant drop in participation rate and does impact that kind of a comparison. But for grades 3 through 8, you can look at it and get a relatively good sense of where we are.
So if I could just, I like to thank you. That makes perfect sense to me. And yeah, the 11th grade numbers are, it looks like about a third of the students participated, and that's not probably enough, and who knows which ones. So hard to draw any conclusions. But looking at the others, if we break out the socioeconomically disadvantaged Latino community, which is one of the largest socially economic disadvantaged communities that we serve, it's as you said, it's comparable to prior years, but you can't turn away from these numbers. 68%, these are the ELA numbers, 68% of the students were below grade level overall. Over 40% were in the lowest category, which is standard not met. That's pretty consistent over all the grades. There's some variation. It goes from as high as 73% below grade level, and the lowest is about 62. So there's really, and for the lowest category, it goes from 33 up to 49 for the very lowest category. So those are grim numbers. And so, I don't want us to turn away. There's no news here. Same was true in 2019. The same was true in 2018. And sadly, there's been very limited progress. But I do think that it's really important whenever we look at these numbers. I'll never forget, you remember. We had a presentation on the CAST results once. You were on the board, I was not on the board yet. And somebody came up and said, these are such great results. These results are the best of any district I've ever seen. It was somebody new giving the presentation. And oh my God, look at how great these are. And somebody, a community member, came in and called us out and said, you're saying all that, but you're bearing the lead, which is this group of kids, that these numbers are genuinely tragic. And how can this happen in a district that has so many resources and aspires to greatness? And so I don't want us to ever, we can fall short, we are falling short, but I don't want it to be I don't want to ignore the fact that we're falling short. I want us to own it, feel it, and as we hope to do something about it. So that was all I had to say. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Ofek. I appreciate that.
I'd like to acknowledge that both of our student board reps apologized for their last year junior class's low participation rate today. So,
oh yeah.
So thank you. You guys look very guilty sitting over there.
We deeply, deeply apologize. I just want to say I did plan on taking it, but my computer was not cooperating with me. You have anything to add on? Yeah, sorry again.
Okay, thank you for that. Anyone else on this item? Okay, so I believe that concludes the information items. I don't think anybody wants to speak on item F, the calendar of board items.
Oh, sure I do.
Do you?
Oh, no, not. Do we really?
Ah, we'll move to board operations. Mr. Branza, I think you have something to say.
Two quick things. One, it's just starting to feel very normal, like normal with masks. Tell me if you guys disagree, but I've got 3 kids in our schools. They go to school, they go to sports, they go to activities. They're doing stuff. It feels very normal just with masks. And it's really, really nice. So I don't know if that's board operations, but the other thing is that I spent Saturday afternoon at Pally's gym watching those basketball games, and it was just awesome. I mean, there were so many kids from both schools there, and I was only there for the varsity games, but the girls game was really exciting to watch. It was very competitive, and Pally won, and then the boys team came, and it was again really competitive game, very close, tied for the last 2 minutes, and on the buzzer, Rogan Gibbons hit a shot in, but it was really exciting. It was fun to see each team take a win, and everyone was very well behaved. Kids, taunted each other with chants, but nothing out of control. So that was great. Fun to see.
That's terrific. Thank you for that. Anybody else like to comment on board operations? Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much then. This meeting is adjourned.